Alone. Ah, that terrifying little word people avoid like a plague. Funny, isn't it? The moment silence creeps in, the moment the room echoes with nothing but your own thoughts, people start losing their minds. They scramble for noise, chase distractions, cling to chaos, anything but solitude. But what if, just what if the silence wasn't a punishment? Isolation, that delicious little word everyone fears like a shadow creeping in the corner of a brightly lit room. You ever notice how people panic the moment they feel alone? Like ants when you pour water on their hill. They scramble, they scream, they suffocate in silence. But maybe, just maybe, they've misunderstood the entire thing. Maybe isolation isn't some cruel joke the universe plays on the weak. Maybe it's the scalpel, the divine knife, the one that cuts deep, not to kill, but to carve out what doesn't belong. See, people don't mind being surrounded by noise. Oh, they thrive in it. Noise keeps them numb. Noise keeps them busy. Noise keeps them from looking in the mirror too long. But when everything quiets down, when the room gets heavy and the phone doesn't ring, and there's no one left to pretend for, that's when the real show begins. That's when the masks start melting and the truth starts screaming. And that's exactly where he wants you. Alone, unfiltered, undistracted, undiluted. Because that's the only place he can get to the raw material beneath all your fancy illusions. You think isolation is rejection? No, it's the invitation, the velvet rope access to the backstage of your own soul, where the glitter falls off and the makeup smears, and you finally see who you are when nobody's clapping. It's the moment where you realize that all the applause in the world can't quiet the war in your chest. But he can. And he waits in that quiet place, that abandoned room you keep running from, that space you call empty but heaven calls sacred. They don't tell you this part, do they? That the greatest transformations happen in the shadows. Not on the stage, that the cocoon is lonely before it's beautiful, that the cave is dark before it's glorious. People want glory without grit. They want miracles without the mess. They want spotlight without solitude. But the author, oh, he writes best in silence. When there's no cheering crowd, no distractions, no shallow validation, just you, your scars, your thoughts, and his whisper threading through the noise you used to call comfort. Funny how people equate absence with abandonment. Just because he pulled you away doesn't mean he walked away. No. He's watching, observing, molding, breaking and building at the same time, but you won't feel the construction if you're too busy calling it destruction. You want to know why it hurts? Because you've been clinging to broken things, and he's prying them out of your hands with holy fire, not because he hates you, but because he knows what you're holding is killing you slowly. So what does he do? He isolates you, strips you, separates you from the leeches you called friends, from the illusions you called identity, from the temporary comforts you mistook for truth. And you scream, you curse, you beg for him to bring it all back. But he's not listening to your noise. He's listening to your soul. And your soul, oh, your soul is finally starting to speak the language of surrender. It's in that hollow place, that bitter silence, that you finally hear the echo of his intent. You start seeing things clearly in isolation, don't you? The fake smiles, the wasted time, the idols you built out of approval and affection. You begin to realize you weren't living, you were performing. And now the stage is empty, the lights are off, and the only spotlight left is the one shining on your soul. That's where he begins the real work. That's where refinement begins. Not in comfort, not in celebration, in isolation, in the furnace, in the silence, in the solitude, where the crowd can't reach, where the lies can't hide, where your heart is naked and trembling in the hands of the one who always saw you even when you were too loud to see yourself. Silence again, hon, but this time let's talk about something nastier, something filthier, something with a grin behind a mask and a hug that strangles. People. Yes, people. Those lovely little creatures with sweet smiles and knives tucked behind their backs. You see, not everyone around you is from heaven's orchestra. Some are just demons wearing perfume and perfect timing. And he knows it. Oh, he sees it before you do. That's why he starts pulling you away, slowly, one by one, name by name, face by face, not because you're unworthy of love, but because you've been surrounded by poison disguised as company. You ever notice how some people only clap when you're weak, only show up when you're broken, only smile when you're lost? That's not friendship. That's feeding time. They don't love you, they love your chaos. They don't support you, they study you. They don't celebrate your healing, they miss your bleeding. But you, poor little puppet, keep calling it loyalty. Keep mistaking your cage for community. Keep holding on to hands that secretly pray for your downfall. And he can't watch it anymore. So he rips it. He tears the curtain down. He exposes the stage. Suddenly the calls stop. The texts fade, the invitations vanish. You start thinking you did something wrong. You spiral, you ache, you question. But no, it's not punishment, it's protection. It's the surgical removal of leeches you thought were lifelines. It's the heaven-sent detox, a divine distancing, because sometimes the only way to save you is to isolate you from what's infecting you. But you don't see it yet. You still cry over the ones who were never praying for your rise, just waiting for your fall. People don't want to admit that some attachments are demonic contracts, silent agreements signed in broken identity and unhealed wounds. And those demons don't show up in horns and fire. They show up in friends, lovers, mentors, family. They come smiling, they come helping, but behind their kindness is corrosion. Behind their advice is manipulation. Behind their support is control. And you were too blind, too desperate, too wounded to see it. So, he steps in, not because you asked, but because your soul was begging. And he listens to your soul more than your mouth, and so the purging begins. Conversations dry up, connections rot, you feel forgotten, abandoned, betrayed. But what if that's not betrayal? What if that's surgery? What if that's not isolation, but insulation? What if that's heaven sealing you off from hell's influence? You keep trying to reconnect, keep trying to go back, keep trying to revive what he buried. But every time you do, your spirit gets heavier, your clarity dims, your peace runs off screaming, because you're not meant to carry those souls anymore. They weren't assigned, they were attached. And attachments kill purpose faster than failure ever will. People want miracles but refuse to lose the mess. They want blessing while cuddling with burden. But he doesn't play like that. He doesn't pour oil into poisoned vessels. So he empties it all, drains you of the fake, cuts ties you would never had the guts to sever, and yes, it hurts, it burns, it confuses, but it's necessary. You see, the enemy studies patterns, but God breaks them. He'll use silence as scissors, he'll use solitude as fire, and he'll use heartbreak as freedom. Because what you thought was rejection was a rescue mission in disguise. But oh, you fight it, don't you? You resist the removal. You run back to the familiar even if it's fatal. You chase after ghosts, beg for old doors to open, plead for old faces to return, not realizing some of them were never meant to walk with you in your next chapter. Some of them were the reason you kept rereading the pain. And God doesn't write in recycled ink. He's not interested in preserving what poisons you. He's not in the business of comfort. He's in the business of calling. And sometimes your calling requires conflict. You wanted love, but he saw leeches. You wanted support, but he saw sabotage. You wanted connection, but he saw contamination. So he intervened, not to break you, but to build you without the bricks of betrayal, without the whispers of manipulation, without the weight of people who only clapped when your soul was bleeding. And you call it loneliness. But heaven calls it preparation. Heaven calls it cleansing. Heaven calls it mercy in disguise. Ah, you finally ask the third question, the one nobody wants to ask out loud, the one that creeps in at 2 a.m. when your pillow becomes a therapist and the silence becomes a sermon. Why does it feel like you're being stripped of everything familiar? Why does it feel like your own shadow is walking in the opposite direction? Why does it feel like God's hand is pulling you into a corner where no one can reach you? Not even the ones who used to know your name, your secrets, your laughter, your tears? Let me tell you a little secret. They were never supposed to make it to your next level. But you, oh no, you thought loyalty meant longevity. You thought everyone you started with was meant to finish with you. Cute, naive, dangerous. You see, there's something funny about elevation. It doesn't come with a crowd. It comes with silence, with discomfort, with detachment, and most importantly, with exposure. Not exposure of you. No, you're already bleeding on the inside. This is about exposing them. The ones who smiled at your light, but secretly prayed for your flame to burn out. The ones who sat beside you during the storm, but brought the rain clouds in the first place. The ones who applauded your dreams but secretly hoped they'd never wake up. God doesn't whisper when he warns. He screams through discomfort. He roars through absence. He shouts through silence. But you keep missing the signs. You think the pain is punishment. You think the silence is neglect. You think the distance is rejection. No, it's realignment. Heaven doesn't operate in chaos. It builds altars where you keep building attachments. And sometimes he's got to demolish the whole structure to get you to see the difference between connection and contamination. You ever notice how the more you grow, the more people start calling you distant, cold, arrogant even? Oh, they'll say you've changed, but that's the whole point. You're not meant to stay soft for those who chewed your kindness like candy and spit out your boundaries like poison. Growth isn't pretty. It's not polite. It's not applause-worthy. It's bloody, it's lonely, it's messy, and it always begins with subtraction. God starts cutting the fat long before he feeds your purpose. He prunes before he plants. He isolates before he ignites. You think he's ignoring you, but he's insulating you from the voices, the patterns, the parasites. He's not removing people from your life. He's revealing who they always were. You just didn't want to see it because you were so desperate to feel seen. You were so busy seeking validation that you mistook vultures for doves. And the funny part, some of those people were never malicious. Some were just not meant to breathe in your next atmosphere. See, purpose has altitude, and not everybody is equipped for thinner air. Some people only loved the version of you that needed them. The broken you, the begging you, the you who stayed small so they could feel big. But now you're rising. Now you're healing. Now you're starting to realize that peace doesn't require permission, that joy doesn't need a cosign, that destiny doesn't wait for approval. And oh, how they'll hate it. Not because you did something wrong, but because you're doing something they never had the courage to do. Break free. Free from cycles. Free from fake bonds. Free from emotional contracts signed in trauma. And that, my friend, is the cost of becoming. The cost of stepping into a life that no longer bends to comfort zones or people-pleasing prisons. The cost of saying yes to him, even when it means saying goodbye to them. You keep thinking you lost people, but maybe you just outgrew their cages. Maybe the silence isn't abandonment, it's confirmation. Maybe your loneliness is the echo of heaven clearing the room for your true tribe. Maybe the rejection was redirection. Maybe your tears were cleansing. Maybe your breakdown was actually a breaking open. Maybe God didn't isolate you to punish you, but to prepare the table without letting the enemy pick a seat again. Now we're getting into the part nobody wants to admit, the moment when solitude stops feeling like peace and starts tasting like punishment, the moment when you sit in your room, lights off, phone dry, no calls, no texts, just the hum of your own thoughts echoing like ghosts, and you ask yourself, did I do something wrong? Funny. That's the trap, isn't it? That nasty little trick your mind plays when God puts you on mute just to amplify your soul. Because you think isolation means exile. But what if I told you it's an upgrade? You see, people don't realize this, but silence is the language of the divine. And it's loud if you actually pay attention, but nah, people want noise. Validation, attention, applause, dopamine dressed as conversation. So when the Holy One pulls the plug on your external world, your flesh panics. You start crawling back to dead conversations, dusty connections, expired friendships, just so you don't have to hear your own voice anymore. Isn't that tragic? You'd rather drown in static than sit with your soul. But the silence, oh, it's surgical. It cuts through your distractions like a scalpel. It forces you to face the parts of you that you've been avoiding, the unresolved grief, the anger you swallowed so many times it became part of your bloodstream, the insecurities you dressed in jokes, the fear you masked with fake confidence. In that silence, there's no audience to impress, no applause to chase, just raw, unfiltered you and the God you keep pretending you don't hear. And you know what's even funnier? You think you're losing your mind, but what you're really losing is the mask. The mask you wore for acceptance, the one that smiled through betrayal, that nodded through disrespect, that performed while dying inside. You're not going crazy, darling. You're just detoxing from the noise you called identity. And the withdrawal, oh, it's vicious. It'll make you question your worth, your purpose, your sanity, because you're finally waking up from the illusion that you needed people to feel whole. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine a stage. You've been performing your whole life, right? Perfect lines, perfect gestures, perfect timing. And the crowd? Oh, they cheered, they clapped, but they never stayed after the show. They never helped you clean up the mess backstage. They only loved the character, not the actor, not the bleeding hands behind the curtain. So what does God do? He tears down the stage. He kills the spotlight. He empties the theater, not to punish you, but to remind you you were never meant to be a puppet for people's approval. Solitude is a sacred surgery, and every minute you spend alone is a stitch closing the wounds you kept hidden behind filters and fake laughter. But most people, they escape it. Run to relationships, jobs, crowds, anything to avoid that healing table, because healing hurts, because growth feels like grief when you're shedding versions of yourself you swore you'd need forever. But if you're brave enough to sit in it, really sit in it, you'll see it. The divine hand pulling out poison with precision. The sacred whispers shaping your character in the fire of stillness. And when you stop fighting it, something strange happens. You hear things. Not voices, no, nothing spooky, just truth. The kind that rattles your bones, the kind that exposes the lies you've been living in, the kind that tells you you never needed them, you needed you. The kind that tells you you were the answer all along. The kind that says you thought it was isolation, but it was intimacy with God disguised. But no one claps for that journey. No one uploads that process because it's ugly, it's quiet, it's slow. And it won't get you likes, but it'll get you life. Real life. The kind that doesn't bend to trend, the kind that doesn't rely on validation, the kind that makes you magnetic, not because you're loud, but because you're rooted, grounded, dangerous in your stillness, unshakable in your solitude, whole in your silence. But people don't like that kind of power, do they? They like noise, distractions, surface level sparks. You're not going backwards. You're being pulled back so you can be launched further, like a bowstring, like a slingshot, like a storm gathering before it roars. And the more it hurts, the more it's working. The more it burns, the deeper it's healing. The more alone you feel, the closer heaven is moving in. Oh, you thought pain was the villain of the story, didn't you? You thought the tears, the silence, the heartbreak were signs that something went wrong, that maybe God forgot about you, that maybe the heavens closed shop and left you hanging in this cold, twisted world with your wounds wide open and no one to stitch them up. But pain, oh, pain is not your enemy. It's the only friend that tells the truth, the only voice that doesn't lie. The only fire that burns off the masks you swore you needed just to survive another day in this charade. See, pain doesn't knock politely. It kicks the door in. It drags you by your hair into places you never wanted to go. It shows you who you really are when no one's watching, when the lights go out, when the applause fades, when the people who once praised you now pretend you don't. That's when pain becomes your greatest teacher. It doesn't whisper like comfort does. No, it screams, it shouts, it stabs. But every cut, every scar, every scream, it's shaping you into something dangerous, something divine. You think diamonds are born in peace? You think gold is formed in comfort? You think lions are raised in cozy beds with lullabies playing in the background? No. Real strength, real fire, real power, it's forged in agony, in the furnace, in the chaos. And that's why pain visits those who are destined to rise. not the weak ones, not the passive ones, but the ones with the potential to disrupt everything, the ones who carry something so heavy, so holy, that it has to be refined before it can be revealed. But most people, oh, they miss it. They run from pain like it's some disease. They numb it with distractions, sedate it with fake smiles, bury it beneath fake friends and shallow conversations. But you, if you're still standing in it, if you're still breathing through the fire, then congratulations, you've been chosen. Chosen to bleed for a greater reason. Chosen to suffer not because you're weak, but because you're becoming someone this world can't control, becoming someone the system can't mold, becoming someone even demons fear when you wake up in the morning. You want to know what pain really does? It strips the noise, it filters the fake, it exposes the idols you built out of relationships, careers, money, image. It takes away what you thought was important so you can finally see what actually matters. It tears apart the illusions so you can meet your soul face to face. And most of the time, that's a brutal encounter. Because when you see yourself without the filters, without the trophies, without the applause, it's terrifying. But it's also holy. Pain is the doorway, not the prison. The ones who sit in it long enough, who don't run, who don't escape, they find something sacred on the other side. They find a version of themselves they never thought existed. The one that can't be manipulated. The one that doesn't need validation. The one that can walk through fire and still come out laughing. The one that no longer seeks comfort, but purpose. The one that knows the difference between being broken and being broken open. You ever notice how pain isolates you, makes you feel like nobody understands, like you're the only one drowning while everyone else is dancing? That's not a coincidence. That's design. That's the divine pulling you into the secret place, not to destroy you, but to rebuild you in silence, to make you dangerous in stillness, to sharpen your spirit like a blade behind enemy lines, because when the pain finally subsides, you don't come back the same. You come back different, heavier, louder in your silence, softer in your fire. And people don't know what to do with that version of you, do they? You confuse them. You're no longer predictable, no longer a puppet. You've seen too much, felt too much, grown too much. And that makes you untouchable in ways they'll never understand. Because now you don't just talk about faith, you've lived through the furnace of it. Now you don't just sing about healing, you carry the scent of the battlefield. You walk with a limp, but that limp tells stories angels weep over. That limp screams, I survived what should have killed me. And there's power in that limp. You won't run. You'll smile that crooked little smile, because now you know. Pain was never your enemy. It was the chisel shaping your destiny. You see, people love the light, don't they? Ah, yes, the sunshine, the applause, the spotlight. Oh, how they dance when the world is watching. But what they don't realize is that the most sacred conversations don't happen in the noise. They don't happen in the crowd. They don't happen when you're busy showing off your mask and pretending you've got it all figured out. No, no, no. The most powerful encounters happen in the silence, the stillness, the moments when no one's watching and the world finally shuts up. That's where he speaks. That's where he shows up. Not in thunder, not in fire, but in a whisper. But people are afraid of the silence, aren't they? They're terrified of what they might hear when everything else fades. So they drown it with music, with noise, with fake laughter and even fake a relationship, because deep down they know. The silence exposes them. It shows the cracks they've been painting over. It reveals the wounds they've been hiding beneath designer smiles. It strips away the facade and holds up a mirror. And oh, they don't want to see that. They don't want to face the version of themselves that stares back from that mirror, the one that cries when no one's around, the one that prays with clenched fists and shaking lips, hoping someone, anyone, is listening. But here's the twist. They don't know that the silence is sacred. They don't realize that it's an invitation, a private meeting with the Creator, a space where you stop performing and start transforming. But it's only when you become still that you start to hear, not with your ears, with your spirit. Because when all the noise fades away and it's just you and him, oh, that's when the real work begins. That's when he starts whispering things the world would never understand. That's when you stop reciting rehearsed prayers and start speaking from your scars, from your gut, from that raw, unfiltered place that nobody ever talks about in church. And he listens. Not to your fancy words, but to your trembling heart, to the tears you didn't wipe, to the sighs you never spoke. He hears it all. Every silent scream, every breath soaked in regret, every moment you thought no one saw you bleeding on the inside. That's the language of intimacy. That's the conversation of the broken. And ironically, that's what he responds to the most. Not your perfection, not your eloquence, but your honesty, your quiet desperation. That's where the fire starts. But the world, oh, the world will never get it. They'll mock your solitude, they'll call you crazy, they'll say you're wasting your time talking to the ceiling, but they don't know what happens in that silence. They don't see the wars you're winning without ever lifting a fist. They don't see how your spirit's being rebuilt word by word, whisper by whisper. They don't see how your tears water the roots of something unstoppable growing inside you. Something fierce, something divine, something that doesn't need noise to be loud. And it's funny, isn't it, how the ones who spend the most time in silence with God become the ones who shake the loudest parts of the world, the ones who walk quietly but carry thunder in their spirit, the ones who don't boast, don't shout, don't show off. But when they speak, heaven leans in, because their voice isn't just words, it's weight, it's depth, it's fire birthed in solitude, and that's the kind of power no platform can give you. That's the kind of strength no crowd can manufacture. That's the kind of intimacy that changes atmospheres without ever needing to prove anything. But people want shortcuts. They want blessings without bruises. They want glory without the grind. They want miracles without the moments in the dark. But it doesn't work that way. If you're not willing to sit in the silence, you'll never hear the secrets. If you're not willing to be still, you'll keep missing the signs. Because he doesn't compete with your distractions. He doesn't yell over your chaos. He waits, patiently, quietly, until you're finally tired of the noise, until you finally crave something real. And when you do, when you finally sit down, shut up and surrender, then, oh then, he speaks in ways that make the loudest storms feel like whispers.